Okay, I think we are live streaming now. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar presenting our 2023 TPS Bursarians. We have got 3 out of 4, which is not too bad, but we are missing one of our Bursarians, who I will talk about in a minute. My name is Ruby Stringer. I'm the Director of Events for the Transport Planning Society. And I kind of look after a lot of our events nationally that the TPS do. One of the great schemes that the TPS run every year is the Bursary scheme. If you haven't heard of it, why not? You should look into it. You should get involved. We run the Bursary competition every year. We have a new topic. The topic is usually related to our Transport Planning Day theme. And the goal really is just to encourage young professional members of the TPS to produce a kind of structured thought piece with a bit of mentorship and a bit of help from kind of other professionals in the industry. And all of our bursarians are awarded a bursary of £500, and the winner gets a little bit extra as well. They're a great opportunity to expand your knowledge of your kind of chosen topic and raise your profile in the profession. And lots of our previous bursarians have gone on to use their bursary as a great addition to their CV and other kind of interesting ways into new research. So that's what we're doing today. We're talking about our 2023 bursarians. This year, we asked our bursarians to answer the question, investigate a transport intervention that has been shown to reduce environmental have I even got the full question? Environmental damage. How did it interact with poverty and social exclusion or social inclusion? How transferable is that solution for other places and problems? And we got 4 really varied responses to that question, 3 of whom are here with us today and are going to present their responses. We also had one from Sarah Garvin, who unfortunately can't join us today, even though she was actually recently awarded the overall winner of the competition. So we're really sad not to have Sarah with us here today. But Omar, Greg, and Angela are going to do a great job of showing us what they've been up to. So I think without further ado, I will hand over to Omar Ajaz from ACOM. Oh, sorry, not from ACOM, from Mott MacDonald, who is going to give us his presentation on BRT and how that is relevant to environmental damage and social inclusion. So thank you, Omar.
Everyone, Omar. Yeah, I'm just gonna share my screen and try and navigate this. Hopefully you guys can all see that in a second. Right, yeah, thanks all for joining, and yeah, I'll try and just go on, and I'm going to present my research paper. And as you can see with the little background there, it's got something to do with buses. So it's just a bit of an agenda of what I'm going to go through. So when we talk about BRT or bus rapid transit, what is it? So essentially, it's a bus-based transport system that serves as a cost-effective investment to urban rail and has the same benefits in terms of capacity or design. And yeah, it's served worldwide at the moment with several BRT systems, loads of BRT systems across the world, moving millions of passengers per day, dedicated corridors spanning thousands of kilometers, and yeah, spanning thousands of kilometers across the world. And numerous studies have basically assessed the aspects of service quality of BRTs and assess the environmental and social factors associated with them, with what they were set out to achieve, and assessed whether these outcomes have been achieved. And that was something that our paper further delves into. So the research objective was to undertake a review of the literature of BRTs in the global south, analyze their case studies, see what the best practices are, where we provided, where there was social value, where there was environmental mitigation, and then we assessed the transferability of the best practices. So what constitutes a good, what can be transferred over from one place to another, and then finally the paper compares case studies within the same country to understand, okay, it's in the same geographic location, but then it further adds a level of complexity of the challenges to implementation. Um, on up there on the right is the BRT standard. So the Institute of for Transport Development and Policy, Transport and Development Policy, ITDP, they've produced this BRT standard, which is a global grading system to evaluate BRTs across, and it considers economic, passenger, and environmental benefits. And it's used by several countries to assess the performance of their transport system. Uh, so yeah, there's a score. The standard has a scorecard, and it uses several indicators to measure how well a city's BRT aligns with certain goals. And this can vary, but there's just some of the elements that it uses. A key shortcoming of this standard is that they're not legally binding or universally accepted. So sometimes you may not be able to capture the full range of benefits in some cities, but some would claim to have a BRT which is of a really high quality but doesn't actually meet any standard. So this is just something that we teased out from the research. Um, so we looked at case studies within the global south and the country, and for a concise review, because there's just so many of them, we offered to study BRTs that had a minimum of a bronze ranking with the ITDP. And this was just, so the countries that we selected were Brazil, Colombia, India, and Indonesia. And these were just some of the BRTs that we looked at. And the India was selected due to the polarized implementation of BRTs. There's a lot of talk about scrapping a load of the BRTs within India. Some of them have got awards, some of them are world renowned, and so we specifically looked at the cases of Delhi and Ahmedabad. Just to go over some of the BRTs in the south. So we looked at Curitiba. So Curitiba implemented the first BRT system in the world in 1947, and its segregated bus lanes and tubes-like stations is a unique design feature, which has sort of been replicated across the world in various other BRT systems, as you'll shortly see. I think that's it. Yeah. So similar to Curitiba, in 2012, Brazil launched Rio de Janeiro's BRT system, and it was a much more modern bus BRT system, as you can see, in integrated modern stations, smart ticketing, and especially improved travel conditions for people in low-income neighborhoods, because it did a great job of interconnecting them to the city center. Similarly, Bogota in Colombia, as you can see, it's a trend going with the tube-like stations, and it serves about 2.4 million passengers every single day. Going to Colombia again, the Medellin BRT system. It forms a part of the integrated transport system of the valley and includes a metro, tram, and cable car. So it's really well integrated with other modes of transport, and serves a lot of people. We're going to Ahmedabad in India, which spans a vast dedicated corridor and has 162 stations, a lot of electric buses, and caters to around 200,000 passengers a day. Moving on again in India to the iBus fleet in Indore. And what this BRT system does is an incredible job of integrating intelligent transport systems within their service. So there's a lot of smart ticketing, smart fare collection, and it serves roughly 70,000 passengers a day. Similarly in Jakarta, that was in Indonesia, and that's one of the largest BRT systems in the world, and serves about 1 million passengers a day, as you can see. And they're starting to look pretty similar with the tube-like stations. So so this was just the methodology. So reviewing of the literature, academic case studies, papers, articles, news, and then we assessed these and then once that was assessed, we assessed the actual BRT systems and looked at a qualitative analysis of where the best practices lie, what they might be from the standards, from what's been applied, what's been achieved. And then there was a bit of a multi-criteria analysis to arrive at our results and discussion. So, what were some of the best BRT practices that we saw across the board? We saw the implementation of dedicated bus lanes, sort of reducing traffic congestion, and dedicated bus lanes really enhanced the reliability of the service. Inclusive design, accessibility, and integrating with other transport modes. So it really does encourage with inclusive design, such as, it really provides a social equity and promotes ridership among disadvantaged users. Integrating with other transport modes and affordable fare structures allows for seamless transition between transport modes and really makes public transport an attractive option for people. Next one, integrated with technology. So really making use of the present day modern technology that we have and trying to implement them into our transport systems really does enhance the quality of service that we're able to provide to people. Next practice was the involvement of community and planning within the decisions. So having good stakeholder engagement as part of the planning process. And yes, implementing safety measures and seeking environmental certification. So actually going that extra step and saying, we want to be certified with our service. And you can get that through the ITDP. So some of the environmental mitigation that we saw with some of the best practices was integrating it with the non-motorized modes. So like similarly that Medellin did with being a part of the whole integrated transport system. It was a great job, the green fleet management and investment in renewable technologies. This was heavily done in Latin America, and for example, in Bogota and Medellin, they've been really reaping the benefits of their investment in the green fleets and clean technologies, and in Medellin, it's saved 75,000 tons of carbon dioxide, and it's equivalent. And yeah, that's just one of the benefits of just investment in green technology and sustainable planning. So another environmental mitigation is sustainable planning and designing and enforcing dedicated bus lanes. It really does allow for coordinated urban planning that encourages high density development around BRT corridors, and it reduces the need for long commutes. And efficient station design, so really honing down on the elements that cause a sustainable service. So social inclusion, we found that the best practices included equitable route planning, so serving areas that are a bit deprived or need that boost of economic options. And we saw this in Brazil, in Rio. Similarly, integrated fare and subsidies. So Bogota had gone even further, Bogota in Colombia, to implement fare subsidies for lower income users and made public transport a more affordable and attractive option. Inclusive design and public awareness campaigns. So this was we saw this in Indore, where the system focused on universal design principles that really incorporated passengers of all requirements, and while public awareness campaigns in Indore as well educated the residents on the environmental benefits of using public transport. And community engagement, so Ahmedabad and Curitiba did a very great job and high level of consultation with the community when planning for their BRT systems. So the transferability of best practices focuses on a different range of focuses on various things, and it depends on various factors. As you can see there, geographic factors, governmental factors, cultural expectations, and economic factors. And yeah, it just really does show the nuanced approach that is required when planning for these systems. So why the comparison of Delhi and Ahmedabad? As you can see, it's as I mentioned, India's seen a very polarizing implementation, and there's a big talk about this, that when a lot of the research found was that the ridership was never the projected ridership of these systems was never achieved. So but that doesn't mean it's a failure. But people think, okay, maybe that's we should be scrapping them entirely because they're not achieving the outcomes. And disparity in outcomes is what's been further studied. So as mentioned, the transferability of best practices does depend on various factors, and it's worth understanding the difference. So Ahmedabad's BRT system takes advantage of the city's flat terrain and the availability of dedicated road space, which was ideal for the bus corridors, whereas the geographic layout of Delhi had issues related to design and allocation of road space because of how densely populated and hilly the region is. So why was Ahmedabad a success? It's simple as the benefits outweighed the negatives, and it was widely regarded as a successful innovation model of BRT networks, and has also received recognition from the ITDP and Sustainable Transport Awards as well. And as you can see, just some of the benefits there of creating employment, improving travel times, reducing emissions. And yeah, so the Delhi BRT, why did it fail? Well, it was widely regarded as a flawed experiment of urban transport and was scrapped by the Delhi government in 2016. And the BRT corridor was dismantled and turned into a regular road. Essentially, it was far from global standards, and here's what went wrong. The poor design and implementation of the corridor, facing resistance from the public, lack of adequate enforcement and regulation, and failing to integrate with other modes of transport, neglecting the needs of people, made it a non-favorable service, and it was even blamed for the ruling party's loss in the state elections. So it really does show the political will is really important when these systems are being planned. So in conclusion, BRT systems BRT systems need careful planning and consideration, considering the local geography, culture, and economy. And it's important to design the systems that are fit for the city, and all requires a nuanced approach and implementation with strong political will and public support. And yeah, what we found is one of the biggest things, that was one of the biggest things, political support and government regulation and public support, such that we saw in the BRT comparisons really does signify the importance of stakeholder engagement and effective planning. And these are just some of the recommendations that we found that we gave at the end of our paper to the planners. So to effectively implement BRT systems, the research recommends a holistic approach that begins with a detailed feasibility study involving all stakeholders that assesses the supply, demand, and potential impacts. And yeah, that's just some of the findings, and yeah, I think that is it.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Omar. Um, a really kind of interesting look, and I really like the way that you kind of dove into each question in the bursary question kind of specifically. Thought that would work really well. I'm gonna kind of abuse my position as chair slightly to ask you a question, and maybe we'll kind of come back and we'll do a group Q&A in a little while. But just find it really interesting. I think often BRT is held up as almost a kind of silver bullet for um, public transport systems and how to kind of like magically solve lots of the issues we have in cities. Do you have any ideas, just based on your literature review and things, why, generally speaking, it's been more popular or maybe more successful in the global south than in the global north? And what kind of, in terms of that question around how transferable it is, do you think there was anything that came out through your research on that point?
Uh, well, when we first started out, we had several different countries, and we were looking at this, looking at that, and then when we finally decided, okay, we need to make it a bit more concise and leave it to developing countries.
Hmm.
So a lot of the countries in the global south are developing countries that essentially might not have the space or capital investment that really show the availability of like the funds to actually support a system like this, and even the requirements. So a lot of the times when a metro is placed or whatever, they kind of overlooked the idea that, oh, maybe we could do something that would be cheaper. So as I mentioned in the first bit, it's a cost-effective way of and a cost-effective alternative, cheaper investment to urban rail. And yeah, that's just some of the findings we had from it. That's why it was just focused on the global south. But I imagine, and even further, it would be really interesting to further dive into, the research could go beyond like individual cities or look at specific cities or look at multi-country assessments to broadly understand the global dynamics of BRT implementation.
Absolutely. And as always, I think buses are really kind of political. Like, they have a lot of like meaning and kind of or at
Yeah.
least, in this country, they have a lot of stigma behind them often and things like that. So I think it's a really interesting thing to look into. Um, Amazing. Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm gonna move on from Omar to Greg now, if that's okay. So we have Greg Sinnott from AECOM. Um, Greg did his TPS bursary paper on Metrolink in Greater Manchester and how that could be rolled out to kind of other areas. And that is what he's going to speak to us about today. So thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Ruby. Right, let me try share this and hope it works. Um, there we go. Right, so as Ruby said, my paper was on Metrolink. I am based in Manchester, so it is a bit biased towards kind of the local transport around here. So I'm just going to give you a little preview of kind of what Metrolink is. So it's our local tram system in Greater Manchester. It is the largest light rail system in the UK, spanning 103 kilometres of track. It's got 8 different lines which connect into these main local authority centres. Noting that at the moment, of the 10 Greater Manchester authorities, it only connects into 7. So we're missing links to Bolton, Wigan, and Stockport. And Metrolink does hold a high capacity of passengers. Pre-COVID, it was operating at 44.3 million journeys per year. That did dip a bit during COVID, but is now back up to a similar amount. So this paper, I aim to look at kind of both the social impacts and the environmental impacts in one go. So the first objective was to review what we call phase 3. So it's this purple section of the Metrolink network. And what I was looking at was whether the evaluation reports for this phase 3 had identified positive environmental and social impacts. The second stage was to pick a local authority where Metrolink currently doesn't exist. So I chose Stockport. And then to look at whether 2 different hypothetical routes into this urban centre would work and kind of what different impacts socially they would have. And then the third objective was kind of to look at spatial analysis and stakeholder engagement, see what challenges would face both of these routes. So objective number 1, looking at phase 3. So we looked at this monitoring and evaluation report, which was published by Transport for Greater Manchester. It's quite a reliable piece of information because it predates the COVID-19 impacts. So all of the data was collected pre-pandemic. And as you know, in transport planning, it's been a bit of a nightmare post-COVID to try understand what impacts are purely COVID related and what impacts are actually from an intervention. So what we found here is because trams are powered by renewable energy sources, they're generally preferable over kind of your private vehicles. And from conducting quite a few surveys, Transport for Greater Manchester found that there's a fair few people. We've got, 38.8 million car kilometres that were removed from the road network in 2019-20. So it's quite a lot of people who are using Metrolink instead of driving. And then on the social side, what they found running a public transport model was that there was a disproportionate benefit on the accessibility of deprived communities. So these deprived communities are getting more benefit from the network than, say, other communities would do. But on the flip side to that, because Metrolink can be quite pricey if you're taking it several times a week, they found that low-income individuals may be getting priced out of the network. So off the base of this, I went on to objective 2, which was route identification. And I looked at 3 different factors here. Factor number 1 was going through strategy and policy documents within Greater Manchester to identify existing proposals for a Metrolink extension. It's been quite a hot topic over the last 2 decades. There's been loads of kind of campaigns that were saying Stockport needs a Metrolink, and it's still an ongoing issue. And one recurring theme that did come up was tram train technology. So this is kind of the Metrolink being able to use your light rail network within the city centre, but also being able to utilise the heavy rail network outside of the city centre. So there's loads of strategy and policy references. In terms of physical infrastructure and barriers, what you need to contend with is obviously the heavy rail network, but also other physical barriers such as the river that runs. I've just realised my mouse probably isn't pointing to the area, but there's a river that runs on this bottom route from East Didsbury to Stockport Interchange, and any Metrolink extension that would need to follow this route would have to go over a bridge. So obviously there are different physical infrastructure considerations. And then finally, the index of multiple deprivation. So just looking at kind of social inequality in the area. What's happened here with these 2 routes is that you've got the East Didsbury route, which is kind of an extension of an existing route. And that's a less deprived area than, say, connecting the Manchester city centre routes into Stockport, because that's going through kind of this long site Gorton area, which is very heavily deprived, lots of crime, lots of unemployment. So these are 2 very different contexts for these socioeconomic routes. So next stage was to engage in some stakeholder engagement. So we identified 131 different stakeholders. This was a mix of transport operators, universities, hospitals, councillors, local transport bodies. And we produced this stakeholder engagement pack, which kind of detailed a load of different questions and factors that would be interesting to look at. So we're looking at kind of the effects of introducing a tram route on employment, education, health opportunities, crime. And then we gave stakeholders, I believe it was 8 working days to respond. So it wasn't a massive window. And then, yeah, it's chaos ensued. So what I didn't realize when sending this out is that on the same day, there was a news article on the BBC saying that one of the Stockport councillors had been out and about that day and had released this kind of press conference saying Stockport wants action, not words, on the tram link. So I didn't quite appreciate how politically sensitive this issue was. So when I sent out the stakeholder engagement pack, there was a bit of backlash saying you need to make it very clear that it's an independent piece of research. It's not attached to AECOM or Transport for Greater Manchester. So I did have to send a recirculation email, but there was a lot learned from that stakeholder engagement process. So then next stage was spatial analysis. So I was using Basemap Track, the accessibility software. And effectively what I did here is I created these isochrones of walking accessibility within proposed stops of the network for both routes. And from this, it kind of informed the scope for the lower super output areas for the next stage of analysis. But just to note here that to actually get Basemap Track to run, you need to draft up like a provisional timetable. So I did create kind of hypothetical stops along the routes, and also kind of how this would fit into the existing Metrolink system. So key findings here, kept it on the social side. So first one was population and population density. Just to note that this route from Manchester city centre to Stockport Interchange is about 3 times longer. So even though the population was quite a lot higher, it does reflect the fact that the routes are different lengths. Population density, obviously, a lot higher towards the city centre because you've got inner centre housing, you've got a massive student area up in this Levenshulme area. And then in terms of disability, what I did find is that extending the route from East Didsbury to Stockport Interchange hits a higher proportion of disabled people. And something that did emerge from the stakeholder engagement is that Metrolink's really good for transport around Greater Manchester if you've got a physical disability. So it has low-level platforms, which are the same level as the tram, so you can just roll on and off. It does have lifts at the stops. It does physical call-outs of what stops are next. So it's quite an accessible use of public transport, whereas, say, getting a bus could be a bit more challenging. So there is definitely an element here to consider in terms of disabilities. I did also look at qualifications and unemployment, and as said before in the IMD section, there is a high proportion of people with low qualifications and a high proportion of unemployment on this top route from the city centre. And then in terms of age demographics as well, this East Didsbury route, there's quite a lot of retired and older people on the East Didsbury route. So it's very much a story of two different demographics for both of these routes. So conclusions. So looking at Route A, which was the Manchester City Centre to Stockport Interchange, what I did find is that it has the opportunity to connect deprived communities with cultural and employment opportunities. It is serving quite a young demographic. But obviously these are the places where you need to focus on kind of the deprivation benefits that you could get from introducing Metrolink. And then the second route from East Didsbury Stockport Interchange, this serves kind of a greater disabled and elderly population who could be dependent on Metrolink. And I think the key point here is that it's more of an orbital extension. So one of the problems in Greater Manchester is that the public transport is very much a radial Manchester city centre to your urban centres in the suburbs. And what we do need is we need a connection, kind of an orbital link that goes from these urban centres on the outskirts of Greater Manchester. So there's definitely a case to be said for that. And I think overall, obviously, with any transport intervention, it's contingent on understanding the characteristics of the local people and place that it serves. So yeah, there's a lot to be learned. And then yeah, I've detailed some learnings, but I think I've gone over quite a few of those. There's a lot of scope for future research, but I think the most important point to highlight here is that since this paper's been done, Andy Burnham, Mayor for Greater Manchester, has said that there will be a business case for a Stockport link to the Metrolink within the next 12 months. I think it was last month. Oh no, it was this month. So just this month, Stockport Interchange, which is kind of this new fancy mobility transport hub in Stockport, has opened, and they have left space for the Metrolink extension. So this is something that's topical. It is something that's going to happen. And yes, there is a lot of political sensitivity over it, but there's also scope for introducing something that could be good both environmentally and socially in Greater Manchester. And I think that's everything.
Thank you so much. That's a really fascinating, little snapshot and kind of really detailed approach to how you could, make sure you're looking at all those different impacts, which I don't know if we're always that great at kind of looking at them all in a holistic way like that. Sorry to hear about the all the drama with your stakeholder engagement as well. That sounds like it was probably really stressful at the time. I was just wondering if you could give us a little bit of without putting your foot in it too much, I wonder if you could give us a little outline of what it is that's making it so politically sensitive at the moment, or what the kind of, because I suppose what it seems from your research is that the two extensions that you looked at, which obviously I appreciate might not necessarily be what were considered in Andy Burnham's business case that he looks at, but the two areas, it's almost a kind of these two demographics that it would benefit are really different and probably have quite different political leanings. So is it to do with that, the kind of the reason that it's all quite controversial, or is it something else at play?
I think there's a couple of factors at play here. Firstly, you've got the history of promised extensions to the Metrolink network. So this has been going on since the 1990s, and there's always been a saying that Stockport will get a Metrolink, and here we are, 30 years later, not happened yet, for whatever reason, potentially cost. But obviously, when you've got that history, there's a lot of opinions about, is it still relevant? Is it still needed? Obviously, there's bus routes that go from Stockport into the city centre. And I did mention the importance of kind of getting that orbital connection as well. But it is interesting with the different demographics, because obviously when you've got people who are contingent on something like Metrolink, um, having these bus routes is all well and good, but if they're not accessible to these different social economic groups, then you kind of need to introduce a transport intervention like this. So I think the actual preferred route that they're going with is the East Didsbury route. And it makes sense because it's the lowest cost and it's also the highest benefit to groups that are reliant on it.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. And then my other question was just going to be, have you sent your research to Transport for Greater Manchester?
I have, yeah, yeah. Some of the stakeholder engagement, I ended up having discussions with people from Transport for Greater Manchester, and they were interested in the research, but obviously at the end of the day, it's obviously which
Very,
options they want to consider, and it is politically sensitive. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens.
yeah, exciting if you get to put your name on it though. That would be great. Um, Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Greg. And then, so last but definitely not least, we are going to come to Anshul Cohen, who works for KCW over in Berlin, I think. Is that right? Yep.
That's
And
right.
he's
Great.
going to speak to us about Sheffield's grey to green scheme. So over to you, Anshul. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Hello everyone. Please give me a second to no, not there. Um, how does that look? Can you see my screen?
Yep, all good.
Perfect. Great. So yeah, I'm Andrew Cohen. I now work for the local transport centre of Berlin, but previously worked for Arup in Sheffield. Hence my research on Sheffield's Greater Green Scheme and its impact on social inclusion and lessons other cities can learn from the scheme. So firstly, I hear you all ask, what is Greater Green? So Greater Green is, and there'll be lots of pictures in this presentation, so hopefully you enjoy. Greater Green uses a mix of sustainable urban drainage systems and new walking and cycling infrastructure to transform the former route of the inner ring road in Sheffield, along with link streets, and stimulate the regeneration of the surrounding area. So here is a little map, and as you can see, the former ring road, I think you can see my mouse hopefully, is the bulk of the scheme. The new ring road, as shown in this map, was completed in 2007 and removed a key severance that had hampered the ability of the town centre to grow to its north. And therefore, the rerouting of the ring road unlocked the strategic aim of Sheffield City Council. And the question then was, well, what to do with all the road surface that had been the former inner ring road and was no longer needed. So there were competing ideas, and one of the deciding factors was that just as the inner ring road was completed in 2007, the 2007 floods occurred, as shown in this picture of the wicker close to the scheme. These caused £1 billion of damage, and therefore, and this created an impetus to create a scheme that was based on the principles of sustainable urban drainage systems and blue-green infrastructure, so that when something like the 2007 floods caused by heavy rain happen in the future, more water from the city centre could be stored and released slowly rather than all at once entering the River Don and overwhelming it. So that's my overview of the history of the scheme. And now I'm going to talk about Greater Green's performance and impact on social inclusion. So the first question, of course, here is, what is social inclusion? And I've defined it as a process that improves the terms on which currently disadvantaged people take part in society and their standard of well-being. So how could Greater Green or a similar scheme improve this? I considered access to nature, giving people access to nature as part of their commute or part of their daily walking, improved walking and cycling facilities, improving the quality of the surrounding area, including by stimulating regeneration, which means that all those who pass through the area will also then in time benefit from the scheme, including those who are socially disadvantaged. So I'll now examine the social impacts I found from the scheme in turn. And so the first one, where there is a clear impact, is the impact on environmental deprivation. And here you can see that Greater Green, the area surrounding Greater Green Phase 1, went from being the 495th most deprived LSOA, which is a unit of area used for the UK census in 2015, to number 4,200 in 2019. So a big improvement and very likely caused by Greater Green, because at this time, this was the major infrastructural local environmental change in this area. We can't do this comparison for Greater Green Phase 2 because at least when I did this research, a similar comparison of 2019 and a more recent year had not yet been released, which is a running theme of this dissertation, that actually some of the data, of course, takes time to become available, which obviously hinders comparisons. So the next area I wanted to look at was the impact on new developments. So these can improve the scheme by improve social inclusion by improving the environment of the surrounding area, making it more accessible for all those who's passed through it. But in this case, unlikely to improve social inclusion significantly through sort of the buildings and facilities provided in the developments themselves, given that I didn't find any evidence they had been specifically targeted at disadvantaged groups. And so, yes, there's two significant developments that are likely to have been made facilitated by Greater Green, shown on the map as West Bar 1 and Castlegate. And Castlegate actually referenced Greater Green in its Levelling Up Fund application to the UK government. And so these schemes will significantly transform the character of the area. Essentially, both were on relatively unused parcels of land, and that will now be transformed, including in Castlegate's case, with the inclusion of a new park and the opening up of part of the Porter River. So again, that will improve social inclusion through giving improved access to the natural environment. So you can see a potential cascading effect of Greater Green. However, other developments, including Wicker Riverside and Old Town Hall, or other parcels of land available for development, have still, that development has not yet come forward. And when that does happen, then of course, the benefits will be further spread and extended. I've also shown a building called Crown House on this map. This was an office block completed in 2010, which was quite bad timing, was abandoned or laid empty until just after the scheme was completed, at which time it was transformed into student accommodation. Of course, we also cannot say that this definitely happened because of Greater Green, but it's likely that Greater Green improved the attractiveness of the area, made it viable for the developers to choose to create this new use for the site. And that involved the removal of a known antisocial behavior hotspot as well, which unsurprisingly the rear of the abandoned building had become. So again, therefore improving social inclusion through indirect impacts on the quality of the surrounding area as well. Of course, as a transport planner, I would not be able to do this without referencing different types of transport users. So in terms of the impact on public transport users, I considered that they could have could benefit from the scheme because it enables them to access urban greening during their journeys, especially where bus stops or tram stops are located in Greater Green. However, actually, because of Greater Green's location on the former ring road, most bus stops are actually located off the scheme, as you can see in this map. and that will also have significance for pedestrian movements, which I'll introduce on the next slide. And in fact, the bus stops where the prime benefits of Greater Green are felt within the town centre are those on Angel Street, which are located just north of Castle Square tram stop. And actually, these are those located furthest away from the route of the former Ring Road, which could also highlight the fact that the town centre is essentially still the development of the town centre around what used to be, of course, the Ring Road, a major traffic artery, is still in progress. We can see that also through the impact on pedestrians, as I'll show you in the next slide. That was a bit too far. Now we can see. So in this is a map of pedestrian usage in Sheffield City Centre that I found from Sheffield City Council, and it shows that actually, so there is one amazing impact of Greater Green in this area, which is that Sheffield City Council found in a survey that 20 to 30% of people working in the area used a different route to be able to walk through the corridor. I was one of those people. When I used to work in Sheffield, I used to take a slightly longer route to work down here rather than down here so that I could get more time with Greater Green, and it was a nice addition to my day. However, the main pedestrian movements, again, are slightly to the south of the scheme, as you can see in the areas marked in red, yellow, and orange, and also areas that are close to but not within the scheme along the Haymarket, as I'm showing with my mouse, linked to the location of bus stops. So I'm close to the end, and I will quickly go through the impact on the cycling network. Of course, Greater Green has improved the infrastructure significantly, as I shown in this picture from the first slide. However, its impact could be increased if the quality of the surrounding cycle routes were increased, which is a work in progress, especially with the routes marked in pink that are under construction. For example, I took this picture of the cycling route from Greater Green out towards Burngreave. It's steep, it goes under a large underpass. It's not particularly attractive. It's covered with pigeon droppings, and unfortunately, this is typical of many of the surrounding routes surrounding Greater Green, which it limits Greater Green's impact in this area. And essentially, for Greater Green to have a large impact on cycling, the quality of the surrounding cycle infrastructure also needs to improve, is what I found here. So lastly, I also did a survey to assess the impact on the local community. And I, in partnership with Sadaka, a local organization based in the Wicker, the area that flooded in the 2007 floods, focused on Sheffield's African and Caribbean community. Of my respondents, 48% said they'd noticed changes to the area as part of the scheme, which was the same proportion passing through the scheme once a week. Their favorite activities were walking, running, and watching the river, which fits well with the areas identified as potential drivers of social inclusion, notably increasing walking and cycling and access to nature. And their main ask for improvement was that there should be more events and businesses in the scheme to bring life to it. And I'll go back now to one of my former slides, which actually shows two locations, Love Square and Two Rivers, where businesses were planned for the scheme, such as cafes or bars. These have not yet been realized, partly due to COVID. However, when these are realized, then they will again have an impact on pedestrian usage, on the liveliness of the scheme area, which will draw people in, and of course promote social inclusion by making the scheme more widely used, and through having more people in the scheme area, more accessible or more inviting to vulnerable groups as well, through increasing natural surveillance. So lastly, a potted summary of my conclusions. An improvement to the local environment, unsurprisingly, is clear through the data. New developments were supported, although whether or not those would have happened without Greater Green and how is, of course, not as clear. Greater Green is still, effectively, the area around the former Ring Road is still mending from the fact that this was previously a major traffic artery. And then hence the impact is still evolving. And sometimes it's hard to say that impacts were directly related to Greater Green, particularly, as I said just now, in the case of new developments. Great. So that is my slide. Those are my slides. And I would now like to open the floor to questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. Such an interesting scheme. I feel like it has a lot of relevance for almost every city in the UK, basically, the kind of ring road experience and how we could repurpose that. It's a really interesting project to look at. I just wanted, while I've got just like following your presentation, Angela, before we kind of bring everyone in and have a discussion together, I was just wondering, I think the point you made around the LUF bid for, I can't remember the name of the planning application that used it, but
Levelling Up Fund, exactly. Yeah.
Using this scheme that is a public realm scheme essentially as part of your kind of reasoning for why you should be awarded funding, I think is really interesting. Do you think that that in itself is a benefit of schemes like this? Should that be included as part of the kind of how a scheme like this benefits or kind of mitigates environmental damage by in itself kind of almost creating a snowball effect? Am I interpreting that correctly?
Say so, yes. I would say yes, definitely, with an important caveat if the scheme is well managed and planned, because how Sheffield used Greater Green in its Levelling Up Fund bid was they said Greater Green is proof that we can do schemes that improve the public realm, we can deliver on time, we can deliver within budget, we can do new and groundbreaking things, which in part the Castlegate scheme is in some ways, because it also involves deculverting part of the River Porter. And so, yes, that experience, saying that we have this experience of doing similar things effectively, was the part that they used in the bid, and that helped them to get funding. And I think also there is the benefit that once you have done a scheme like this, you have that experience, you're more willing to do similar things again. And actually Sheffield has replicated the Greater Green model in various other public realm schemes in the city centre. So you could say, yeah, one of the sort of side benefits is that you get that knowledge and experience and can then replicate that in the future, and thereby extend the benefits, of course, to more and different areas.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, fantastic. Omar and Greg, I wonder if I can bring you back in. So if anyone's got any questions from the audience, feel free to send them through to us. But I had a question for all of you actually. Kind of, I think what came through as a really interesting point is that all of you defined social inclusion and how you actually measure social inclusion and what we can use as metrics of social inclusion quite differently. And I don't know, Omar, I was wondering if I came to you first on whether ITTB, ITDP provides any guidance on a kind of universal way of defining that and what should and shouldn't be included on a kind of, if we're considering transferability in these approaches, what did anything come through from your research in that terms of that?
Yeah, so in terms of the BRT standard, because I imagine they do actually have other standards for social inclusion, because they've actually done a lot of papers on social inclusion, not social inclusion, but as in promoting social equity. And in terms of a BRT standard, social inclusion was mainly defined around accessibility, safety, and security, particularly on women's safety. And then it was also looked at service quality. So, and that's not just efficiency, it also serves into areas such as does it serve deprived areas? How does it connect with the greater scheme of things? So yeah, social inclusivity, I think, as you mentioned, is like a broad spectrum, and yeah, we all defined it in different ways. So yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting. Greg, how did you kind of decide what you were and weren't going to include in your Metrolink example?
Yeah, it was a tricky one. I think initially I went down the route of staying to protected characteristics.
Hmm.
So I've been doing a bit of work on kind of equality impacts in work itself. And I thought if I go down the route of picking every protected characteristic and looking at that, it'd be quite interesting. Obviously I did have to narrow that down a bit. Um, but also I did find that Greater Manchester tends to include income as a protected characteristic. It's not traditionally one, but I think it's quite a key thing to include here because obviously it forms quite a bit of that deprivation and that barrier to accessing transport. But there was also not directly relevant, but I did speak to someone from the Greater Manchester Design Reference Group, and they actually highlighted that consultation material should be a lot more accessible. And it's something I'd never thought about doing the essay. They were saying, yeah, there should be like a short version where you're kind of explaining all of the technical terms in a way that people from different backgrounds can understand. And there should be a Braille version where obviously people with accessibility needs can use it. I just thought it was really interesting. And yeah, as you said, everyone kind of looks at it in a different approach, but there's lessons to be learned there.
Yeah, and I suppose in it to an extent as well, you're shaped by the data that's available, because especially when you're trying to do a comparison, you can only use data that's already been collected, really. So there is that as well. And so I thought it's really interesting that you brought in the kind of access to nature and kind of urban greening as part of that definition of social inclusion. What was the kind of background to that decision for you?
Well, essentially so I knew I wanted to write about Greater Green, and it's the sort of intervention that we need if we are to address the climate crisis in the future and to deal with things like urban heat islands, etc. But actually, Greater Green itself had not really been developed with social inclusion as a primary goal, and therefore social inclusion was not something that that was really sort of considered when monitoring and evaluating the scheme. And so then I had to think, well, how could Greater Green drive social inclusion? And actually in Sheffield and many other areas, as of course, people who are in deprived circumstances or disadvantaged circumstances are much less likely to have access to nature in their neighbourhoods. And in Sheffield, they are much more likely to use public transport, in particular the bus. And so that's how I sort of came to access to nature as a theme, because for some of these people, catching the bus in the area of Greater Green could be their opportunity to access nature on a day-to-day basis.
Brilliant.
And of course,
Thank you so much.
access to nature, I should add, has proven physical and mental health benefits, which if I had more time, would have gone into, of course, in more detail. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, of course. It's hard to kind of translate what 6 months worth of research into a 10-minute presentation on a day like today, I think. I was going to ask a couple more questions, but we're actually getting pretty close on our time. So I'm wondering if maybe we should wrap things up and kind of head off for our lunch. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. And everyone's papers are available on the TPS website to be read and downloaded. And the question for this year is in the process of being set as we speak. So look out for updates on applying for the bursary competition 2024. So thank you very much, Omar, Greg, and Anshul for joining me today. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Ruby.
Thank you.
Cheers.